attorney who is very experienced in Gainesville, who had no connection with this district. The investigation was done. We received a complaint from an attorney on behalf of my corner, Wilson McCoy. He then wrote the school board, I believe, another letter asking for 4 things. That was written on January 18th, 2022. The complaints under the rule, if there was a finding that there is a reasonable probable cause of a violation, that it has to be sent to the governor. And with that, I have discharged my responsibility and presented it to the board. There was, in fact, a finding, and you've all received the report, so I don't need to go through the report.
Thank you. I have 2 comments, one from Mr. Thacker and one from Mr. Melendez. Mr. Thacker.
We received a copy of the report that you just mentioned, Frank, and the findings from the attorney doing the independent investigation into school district vendor complaint. The report stated, and this is a quote from the report, Mr. Arguello did engage in intimidating and hostile acts against the vendor's business interests that appear to be beyond the scope of his duty as a school board member of oversight of the school district contract and funds. Based on the foregoing, there is reasonable cause to believe Mr. Arguello violated School Board Rule 2.70, subsection B.2. This all happened after the vendor was asked by Mr. Arguello to contribute to his sister's campaign. Mr. Arguello's sister is running for a seat on the school board. The vendor declined to financially support Mr. Arguello's sister. Mr. Arguello then used his position on the school board to harass and intimidate the vendor, including contacting the vendor's other clients to try and persuade them to drop the vendor from representing them. Had many school district personnel talk of similar things of similar nature. I've witnessed some of this intimidation of school district employees at our meetings. I know there's a fear of coming forward and getting on Mr. Arguello's bad side for fear of repetition.
Is this still a quote, or is this not you?
Mr. Thacker speaking. I have you as
I want-
No, it's just, we didn't know if you still read
The
it.
quote ended after the School Board Rule 2.7. I'm sorry, I apologize for this. This is me. I want to be very clear that I consider this a very serious offense. This is not the way I believe we should act as a school board or individual school board member. I do not want there to be any perception in the vendor community, our district community, or the county as a whole that this is the way the Osceola School Board conducts business. We cannot tolerate malfeasance and abuse of office. Our School Board Rule 2.70, Section 5B2C states if reasonable cause is recommended by the investigator against a school board member or superintendent, if that superintendent is elected, the recommendation shall within 20 days be forwarded to the governor's office to determine if there is evidence that malfeasance or misfeasance or malfeasance of office occurred. The governor's office is then responsible for taking any necessary action in accordance with applicable law with reference to an elected official. That's the rule. I'm back. It's embarrassing to have to be having this public discussion instead of meaningful discussions about students and improving the school district. I believe there is evidence of misuse of public office and tying financial support to a political candidacy. In this case, the board's sister is intimidation of a school district vendor who declined to contribute. We would not accept this intimidating behavior from a district employee. We should be the example on the board. I believe we must hold ourselves to an even higher standard. I would like to make the following motion. As per school board rules, the Osceola County School Board shall send a letter to Governor DeSantis for review of the findings on Mr. Arguello. He will be able to determine if misconduct has occurred and whether the trust placed on us as elected officials has been breached. Florida statutes give the governor the sole authority to suspend or discipline school board members. We are required by our own rules to ask the governor to review this finding. Second, I'd like the board to reprimand and censure Mr. Arguello for misconduct of harassing and intimidating a school district vendor. Third, Like to have a lawyer issue a letter of apology to the vendor expressing our regrets for any damage done to their business, reputation, and personal anguish that was brought by these circumstances. And lastly, this has dragged on for far too long. This has been going on for months. I would ask that these documents be prepared and mailed no later than next Tuesday, the 8th. I'm well aware that drafting of these documents will cause stress on the author and will incur the displeasure of Mr. Arguello. If the board is interested, I've done some drafts of the 3 different things I talked about here. If anybody would like to see them, we can pass those out. If it's a straw man to start, I don't care. It's up to you guys. That concludes my motion.
I have a motion on the floor. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion by Mr. Thacker, a second by Mr. Bass. All those in favor?
No, you got discussion.
Discussion.
Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Melendez, you were next.
Yeah, I served on the school board before, and we used to have employee hearings. I don't think there's been one, like a formal hearing here. And those are very tough, because sometimes you know that employee, and you have to try to be neutral and impartial. If you try to apply the school board rules as they're written, no matter who it is. And so when I look at this matter before us, we should envision that, let's pretend that it's not a school board, period. Let's pretend that it's a teacher. It's Dr. Pace. It's any other employee in the district. And I believe that we should look at this matter at the same level of scrutiny that we would do any employee. No school board member should really be above the law, and no school board member should be treated any differently than any other employee that's here. And so, with that being said, I'm not trying to convince you guys to do anything different, but just letting you know that the standard should be set, that this is what we expect from any employee of the district, and that school board members should not be treated any differently than any employee that works for us.
Thank you. Mr. Arguello, you have your light up as well?
Yeah, so I completely agree with Mr. Melendez. I don't think that employees should be treated any differently than a school board member. I also don't think that school board members should be treated differently than one another. For example, if we're going, number one, this is an investigation that an attorney did outside. The entire investigation is based on a series of interviews with people who do or do not know. I will say that this is a work of fiction to the greatest degree. Number one, I never asked Mr. Horner's clients to fire him or anything of the nature. However, I will say this. Number one, I did ask Mr. Horner for a contribution, just like everyone here has asked Mr. Horner for a contribution. I've also asked other vendors, just like other school board members have asked other vendors. The difference is that Mr. Horner knew 2 things about me. Number one, no matter how much money he contributed to any of the campaigns of any candidates that I would support, that it meant nothing to me, and that I would never provide Mr. Horner with a guaranteed answer the way he gets from potentially other school board members. Case in point, Mr. Horner came here based on having not met any of the standards of his contract, in my opinion. I asked for Mr. Horner to be relieved of the contract, his contract terminated, and everyone here who has received a contribution from Mr. Horner voted in his favor. That would never happen with me. Mr. Horner, if you're watching, if you're listening, write me a contribution tonight, and I will still ask for your contract to be terminated, because no one who represents what Mr. Horner represents, in my opinion, deserves to be a member of a community that's serving their students, okay? All you have to do is Google Mr. Horner's name, and all of a sudden, these are absolutely horrendous situations that we're putting as a representative of our school district, number one. Number two, I believe that anyone who has taken a contribution from Mr. Horner should abstain from voting on this issue. If you vote on this issue while you're taking money from that same lobbyist, it says far more about you than the sham investigation says about me.
Yes.
Mr. Thacker, I appreciate the fact that you're the only human being that has the courage to bring this up, considering your short amount of time left on the school board. However, I will say this. I think it is rich beyond measure. The fact that a school board member that has tens of millions of dollars of conflict of interest before this board has the courage to come up here and talk about anyone's behavior, if anyone should be ashamed of themselves, sir, it should be you. You've literally, your wife has come here, had contracts before this board regarding tens of millions of dollars of real estate. Now, we can say, she also happens to be on a lot of these contribution reports, right? I never asked your wife for a campaign contribution. I still called her out on her conflict of interest, and you as well. All of these vendors who provide, everyone, the entire community needs to go through all of these campaign contribution lists, and you'll find the same names over and over and over again. They play an important role. But Mike Horner's the only one who came forward to say that I tried to manipulate him. Let me tell you what I don't like about Mr. Horner. Mr. Horner sat across from me at a table at Denny's over a cup of coffee and told me that he specifically chose Mr. Bass to sit in that seat. That he put Mr. Bass in that seat. That's what Mr. Horner told me. So if Mr. Horner tells me that he's putting someone in that seat, that has a large connotation. I know he didn't put you in the seat, Mr. Thacker. You're one of the masterminds of the county, I get it. Certainly, he didn't put anybody else here on the seat. I know Mr. Melendez didn't get put on here by Mr. Horner. I know that Teresa, Madam Chairman here, also wasn't put in her seat by Mr. Horner. Her race was an entire miracle. However,
It's not a miracle, I worked my butt off.
I'm
to
still
get the seat.
speaking. You're right about that. You earned it and you got it. So here's the thing. However, you may not have earned, or Mr. Horner immediately, diligently went back and put campaign contributions under your name right here, right? But you're voting against them. So we have someone who supports the sex trafficking who has been caught, okay? Allegedly caught supporting sex trafficking or sex worker scenarios in our county. He had to resign from a state rep seat based on the things that he's been caught doing. And then the first thing that you guys do is go and hire him as a lobbyist?
Wow.
You're worried about me? Listen, I'm not ashamed to go and tell anybody how I feel. I'm not ashamed to go tell Mr. Horner to go to hell.
Wow.
I'm not ashamed to go and tell you, Mr. Thacker, to go to hell.
Wow.
Not just over this, over anything, regardless. I think that everyone here, all 400,000 people that live in Osceola County, know for a fact that I will come to you and I will tell you exactly what I think. And you know what? If Mr. Horner, knowing that, still filed this complaint, obviously he had no intimidation factor coming from me. In fact, if anybody's trying to intimidate somebody, it's this board here and Mr. Horner jointly trying to intimidate me to get me to shut up and pass all this BS, all this BS contract, all of this BS to look past the conflicts of interest that you have here regarding real estate. That's what you guys are trying to do. So here's what I'm gonna do next. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna leave this meeting, I'm gonna go home, I'm gonna kiss my kids, I'm gonna go to bed, I'm gonna wake up and I'm gonna call the Florida Law Enforcement Department. I'm gonna call FDLE and I'm gonna ask them what it takes to get, maybe put charges on Mr. Horner for trying to intimidate an elected official to vote the way that he wants me to. So we'll see who has more credibility. Some sham thing where they interview me and they ask me, by the way, I recorded the interview, right? So some sham interview process where they interview me and they interview this person and then it's a he said, she said, and then you guys wanna come and do it. First of all, the governor's not gonna remove me over this BS. I think that he sees straight through your BS, even straight through the BS of that mask that you're wearing, that you were wearing with Mr. Booth. Everyone in this community knows. Everyone in this community knows. Just like Mr. Horner had you and you and you all sit down in a picture next to the candidate for District 4, okay, and all of you standing together, giggling, taking pictures together. Well, Mr. Horner's not gonna pick any more candidates for this school board, I can guarantee you that. Because not only am I gonna walk right past this little letter that you're gonna write, which means nothing to me, but I'm gonna work my butt off to make sure that I'm the only person that's left standing at this seat, along with the entire community, because they know, and they're tired. All of they're tired of Mr. Bass's lack of courage, they're tired of your conflict of interest, they're tired of your indecisiveness, and they're tired of people not having a sense of integrity when they come up here and they represent the population.
Yes. Yes.
I have.
You got your back. You got your back.
Question has been called, do we have a second?